She thought they'd just repainted her door. But when Sarah discovered the truth behind the HOA's innocent mistake, she unleashed a legal nightmare that would cost them everything. Sometimes the smallest violations hide the biggest secrets, and this time karma came with a 7-figure price tag. Sarah Chen pulled into her driveway at 6:47 p.m., her Honda Civic's engine ticking as it cooled in the November chill. The presentation to the Morrison account had run late, and all she wanted was to collapse on her couch with leftover Thai food and forget about quarterly projections. But something was wrong. Her front door, the deep forest green she'd carefully selected 2 years ago to complement the brick facade, was now a jarring shade of beige. Not just any beige, but that soulless, builder-grade beige that screamed conformity from every subdivision in America. What the hell? Sarah's designer? Heels clicked against the concrete as she approached the door, her heart hammering. She'd lived in Willowbrook Estates for 3 years, and while the HOA was strict, they'd never touched her property without permission. The paint was fresh, still tacky in spots where the brushstrokes were visible. Whoever had done this work was either in a hurry or didn't care about quality. Both possibilities made her blood boil. Inside, Sarah dropped her briefcase and laptop bag, not bothering with her usual ritual of organizing her work materials. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The HOA office would be closed, but she had Margaret Whitmore's cell number from the welcome packet. As the HOA president, Margaret prided herself on being accessible to residents. "Margaret, this is Sarah Chen from 4127 Maple Grove. Someone painted my front door today without my permission." "Oh, Sarah." Margaret's voice carried that practiced tone of authority wrapped in false sweetness. "I'm so glad you called. Yes, we had that taken care of today. Your door was in violation of the community standards." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "In violation? I submitted the paint color for approval when I moved in. You approved it." "Well, dear, that was 3 years ago. The board has updated our color palette to maintain property values. All doors must now be either classic beige, warm taupe, or antique white. Your green was..." Well, it was drawing complaints from neighbors. What neighbors, and why wasn't I notified? Margaret's pause stretched just long enough to feel deliberate. "We sent several notices, Sarah. Perhaps you should check your mail more carefully." The final notice stated that if compliance wasn't achieved within 30 days, the HOA would correct the violation at the homeowner's expense. "I never received any notices. Not one. I'm sorry you feel that way, but our records show your records are wrong." Sarah's voice rose, then she forced herself to breathe. Getting emotional would only give Margaret ammunition. "I want copies of these alleged notices, and I want to know who authorized painting my door. The board has full authority to maintain community standards as outlined in the CC and RSU signed when you purchased your home. The cost of the paint job will be added to your monthly assessment. I believe it was $300. $300 for a paint job that looked like it was done by a drunk teenager." Sarah's vision blurred with rage. "I want those notices, Margaret. Tonight. The office is closed, dear. You can pick them up tomorrow after 9. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, then at her violated door. In her previous life before the divorce, before the career change, before she'd bought this house as a symbol of her independence, she might have accepted this. Might have grumbled and paid the fee and painted over the beige with something Marguerite approved, but that Sarah was gone. This Sarah had clawed her way back from financial ruin after her ex-husband's gambling debts destroyed their marriage. This Sarah had rebuilt her credit, earned her real estate license, and bought this house with money she'd earned selling properties to other people, chasing their own version of the American dream. And this Sarah didn't back down from bullies. She pulled out her laptop and began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. First, she documented everything with photos: the door, the sloppy paint job, the areas where beige had dripped onto her brick. Then she started researching. The Willowbrook Estates CC and RS were 63 pages of legal jargon, but Sarah had read them cover to cover before buying. She'd been burned by fine print before. As she scrolled through the document, with her original purchase agreements, a pattern began to emerge. The color restrictions Margaret had cited weren't in the original CC and Rs. They'd been added in an amendment dated 6 months ago, an amendment that required a 30-day notice period for existing homeowners and a 60-day grace period for compliance. Sarah's pulse quickened. If Margaret was lying about the notices, she might be lying about other things too. She called her neighbor, Tom Brennan, who lived 3 houses down. Tom was retired, spent most of his time working in his garden, and seemed to know everything that happened in the neighborhood. "Tom, it's Sarah. Did you see anyone painting my door today?" "Oh, hey Sarah. Yeah, that was weird. Some guy in a pickup truck, no company logo or anything, did a real sloppy job too. Why, the HOA claims they sent me multiple notices about a color violation. Did you get anything like that?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "You know, that's funny. I got a notice about my mailbox being the wrong color. Apparently black isn't allowed anymore. Has to be bronze or brass. But I never got any follow-up notices. Just the one about 2 weeks ago." "Did you change your mailbox?" "Hell no. I figure if they want it changed, they can explain why the black mailbox I've had for 5 years is suddenly a problem." After hanging up, Sarah spent the next 2 hours calling neighbors. Out of 12 households, she reached 7 had received single notices about various violations, fence colors, mailbox styles, even lawn ornament restrictions that hadn't existed. In the original CC&Rs, none had received the multiple notices Margaret claimed were standard procedure. By midnight, Sarah had a theory. By 2 a.m., she had a plan. She started with the County Records Office website, searching for permits and work orders related to Willowbrook Estates. Most HOAs filed permits for community improvement projects, even if they weren't legally required to. It was good practice, and it created a paper trail. What she found made her stomach drop. 3 weeks ago, the HOA had filed a bulk permit for Community Beautification Initiative, exterior paint correction. The permit listed 47 properties for non-compliant exterior elements. Her address was on the list, but the permit was dated 2 weeks before she'd allegedly received her first notice. Sarah's hands trembled as she printed the permit. This wasn't just about her door anymore. This was a coordinated campaign to justify expensive corrections at homeowner expense, probably padding the pockets of whatever contractor was doing the work. She thought about her neighbors' retirees on fixed incomes, young families already, stretched thin by mortgages and daycare costs. How many of them would just pay the fees rather than fight? How many would assume the HOA was acting within its rights? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or we'll find more violations. Your roof looks like it might need work too." Sarah screenshotted the message, then blocked the number. But the threat was clear back down, or face escalating harassment. She'd been married to a man who thought threats and intimidation were appropriate responses to problems. She'd watched him destroy their financial stability while expecting her to stay silent and compliant. She'd learned the hard way that bullies only stopped when someone made them stop. At 3 a.m., Sarah drafted 3 emails. The first went to her attorney, Susan Walsh, who'd handled her divorce. The second went to the county planning department, requesting a formal review of the HOA's permit. The third went to the local newspapers. Investigative reporter, a woman named Jessica Torres, who'd written a series about HOA abuses in neighboring communities. But her masterstroke was the 4th email sent to every address on the Willowbrook Estates directory. The subject line read, "HOA overreach. They're coming for your property next." In the email, she laid out everything she'd discovered: retroactive rule changes, the lack of proper notice, the pre-filed permit, the anonymous threats. She included copies of the permit, photos of the sloppy paint job, and a detailed timeline of the HOA's actions. She ended with a simple message: "They're betting we'll stay quiet and pay up." They're betting wrong. By 7 a.m., her phone was ringing nonstop. Neighbors who'd received similar violation notices, others who'd noticed suspicious activity around their properties, and several who'd been hit with unexpected HOA fees for emergency repairs they'd never requested. The revolution had begun. At 8:30 a.m., Sarah stood in her driveway, watching Margaret Whitmore's silver BMW pull up to the curb. Margaret emerged, wearing a tennis outfit and an expression of barely contained fury. "You had no right to send that email," Margaret snapped. Her yoga-toned arms crossed over her chest. "You're spreading lies and causing unnecessary panic." "I'm sharing documented facts," Sarah replied calmly. "Speaking of which, I'm still waiting for copies of those notices you claim you sent me." Margaret's face flushed. The notices were sent according to proper procedure. If you didn't receive them, that's a postal service issue, not an HOA issue. Show. The emergency HOA board meeting was called for 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, giving residents less than 24 hours notice. Sarah arrived at the Willowbrook Community Center to find the parking lot packed and tensions running high. Word had spread faster than Margaret had anticipated. Inside, the usual setup of folding chairs facing a long table had been overwhelmed. Residents stood along the walls, sat on the floor, and clustered in the doorway. Sarah recognized faces from her neighborhood canvassing the Johnsons, who'd been hit with an $800 fee for unauthorized fence modifications. The elderly Kowalskis charged $1,200 for mailbox corrections they'd never requested. Margaret sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members Sarah barely knew. To Margaret's right sat a man in an expensive suit who definitely didn't live in the neighborhood. His presence made Sarah's instincts prickle. "Thank you all for coming," Margaret began, her voice carrying over the murmur of angry voices. "I know there's been some confusion about recent community improvements." Tom Brennan stood up from the 3rd row, his normally gentle demeanor replaced by steely anger. "You mean the fraud?" The room erupted, voices overlapped, as residents shouted questions and complaints. Margaret banged a gavel that appeared to be brand new. "Order! We will have order!" Margaret's face was flushed, her composure cracking. "These accusations are completely unfounded. The board has acted within its full authority to maintain property values and community standards." Sarah stood slowly, and the room quieted. Over the past 3 days, she'd become the unofficial leader of what people were calling the Willowbrook resistance. "Margaret, you still haven't provided copies of the notices you claim to have sent. You also haven't explained why the HOA filed permits for work before those notices were allegedly sent." The man in the suit leaned forward, whispering something to Margaret. She nodded, then addressed the room. "I'd like to introduce David Kellerman from Kellerman & Associates. Mr. Kellerman is the HOA's legal counsel, and he'll be handling all questions about board procedures." Kellerman stood, his smile as predatory as his handshake was firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand you're concerned about recent community improvements. However, I need to caution you that making false accusations about the board's conduct could expose you to defamation lawsuits. The board has full discretion to maintain community standards, and questioning their authority or spreading unsubstantiated claims could result in legal action." The room fell silent. Sarah felt the change immediately, the fear creeping in. The way people avoided eye contact, this was exactly what Kellerman intended. But Sarah had been threatened by better intimidators than a small-town lawyer. "Mr. Kellerman," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "are you threatening legal action against residents for asking questions about board conduct?" "I'm simply informing residents of their legal obligations regarding defamation." "And are you aware that threatening residents to suppress legitimate complaints about HOA misconduct is itself a violation of state law?" Kellerman's smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that under Civil Code Section 1365.2, HOAs cannot take disciplinary action against residents for filing complaints or speaking at board meetings. Your threat of defamation suits for questioning board authority is textbook intimidation." The room stirred. Sarah continued, pulling out her phone. "I'm recording this meeting, as is my right under the Open Meeting Act. Mr. Kellerman, would you like to repeat your threat about legal action for residents who question board authority?" Kellerman's face reddened. "I made no threats. I simply, you said, and I quote, questioning their authority or spreading unsubstantiated claims could result in legal action. That's a threat, counselor, and it's on record." Her gavel again. "This meeting is about community improvements, not legal technicalities." "Then let's talk about improvements," Sarah said, turning to address the room. "How many of you received multiple notices before work was done on your property?" Hands stayed down. Sarah nodded. "How many received a single notice, or no notice at all?" Nearly every hand in the room went up. "And how many of you were charged for work that was done poorly or that you never requested?" The forest of hands was damning. Sarah turned back to the board. "Margaret, You've claimed that proper notice was given and that all work was authorized. The residents of this community are telling you that's false. Are you calling them liars? I'm saying that our procedures were followed correctly, Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then show us the documentation. Show us the certified mail receipts, the email confirmations, the board meeting minutes where these decisions were made. Margaret looked to Kellerman, who leaned forward again. The board is not required to provide documentation to residents making hostile inquiries. Actually, they are, Sarah said. Civil Code Section 1365.2 requires HOAs to provide access to records within 5 business days of a written request. I made that request 4 days ago. She pulled out a printed email. I have the delivery confirmation right here. The room buzzed with whispers. Sarah pressed her advantage. Margaret, you've had 4 days to produce simple documentation that should take minutes to locate. The only reason you wouldn't have it is if it doesn't exist. Margaret's composure finally cracked. You have no idea what you're dealing with here. This community has standards, and if you don't like them, you can leave. There it is, Sarah said quietly. The real message. Pay up or get out. She turned to face the room. That's what this is about. Not community standards or property values. It's about a captive market of homeowners who can be charged whatever the board decides, for work they never requested based on rules that change whenever it's convenient. Tom Brennan stood up. Sarah's right. I've lived here 8 years, and I've never seen anything like what's happened in the past 6 months. Suddenly, everyone's in violation of something. It's a shakedown, called out Maria Santos, a single mother who'd been charged $600 for unauthorized garden modifications. They're betting we'll pay rather than fight. Kellerman stood again. I strongly advise all residents to consider the legal implications of making defamatory statements about the board. False accusations can result in significant financial liability. Mr. Kellerman, Sarah said, I'm curious about your fee arrangement with the HOA. Are you paid hourly, or do you receive a percentage of the fees collected from residents? Kellerman's face went pale. That's confidential information, is it? Because HOA financial records are supposed to be available to residents, including legal fees and vendor payments. Sarah pulled out another document. I requested the HOA's financial records, along with the other documentation. Still waiting for those too. Margaret banged her gavel frantically. This meeting is adjourned. Actually, it's not, Sarah said. Open Meeting Act requires that public comment periods remain open until all residents who wish to speak have been heard. This is not a public meeting, Kellerman interjected. This is a private board meeting. Wrong again, counselor. Any HOA meeting where assessments, rule changes, or disciplinary actions are discussed is subject to open meeting requirements. And since you're discussing the fees charged to residents for these improvements, this is absolutely a public meeting. The room erupted in applause. Margaret's face was now deep red, her hands shaking as she gripped the gavel. Fine, Margaret snapped. You want documentation? You'll get it. But you're not going to like what you find. She nodded to Kellerman, who opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mrs. Chen, you've been very vocal about your concerns. Perhaps you'd like to know about the other issues we've identified with your property. Sarah's blood chilled, but she kept her expression neutral. What issues? Kellerman spread photos across the table. Unauthorized landscaping modifications, fence height violations, improper outdoor lighting, window treatments that don't conform to community standards. The photos showed Sarah's backyard, taken from multiple angles, her privacy fence, which she'd installed within HOA guidelines, her garden, which she'd carefully designed to comply with all stated rules, her deck lights, which were identical to dozens of others in the neighborhood. These photos were taken yesterday, Kellerman continued. The total cost of bringing your property into compliance will be approximately $12,000. Work will begin next week. The room fell silent. Sarah felt the eyes of every resident on her, waiting to see how she'd respond to this escalation. But instead of fear, Sarah felt a cold, familiar anger. The same anger she'd felt when her ex-husband had tried to use financial pressure to keep her silent about his gambling debts. The same anger that had driven her to rebuild her life from nothing. Mr. Kellerman, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Are you threatening to vandalize my property if I don't stop asking questions about board conduct? I'm informing you of code violations that need to be addressed. Code violations that didn't exist until I started investigating your fraud. Sarah turned to address the room. Everyone see what's happening here? This is retaliation, pure and simple. She walked to the front of the room, facing the board directly. You've made a mistake. Margaret, you've escalated this from a civil matter. Sarah's security system recorded the first break-in attempt at 2:47 a.m. on Friday morning. The motion-activated cameras caught a figure in dark clothing testing her back gate, then retreating when the floodlights triggered. By morning, she'd installed additional cameras and changed all her locks. By Friday afternoon, she'd received 3 more anonymous threats. Her car had been keyed in the grocery store parking lot, and someone had dumped motor oil on her driveway. The message was clear: back down, or things would get worse. Sarah's response was to file a police report and double down on her investigation. The FBI field office is taking this seriously, Susan Walsh told her over coffee at a bustling downtown cafe. Sarah's attorney had insisted on meeting in public after her own office had been broken into the night before. Nothing taken, but files related to the HOA case had been rifled through. How seriously? Sarah asked, scanning the room out of habit. 3 days of escalating harassment had made her paranoid, but the paranoia was keeping her alive. They're opening a federal investigation into organized fraud. Apparently, Willowbrook isn't the only HOA community that's been hit with this kind of systematic billing fraud. The FBI has been tracking a pattern across 3 states. Sarah's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. You're saying this is bigger than just Margaret? Much bigger. The fraud scheme you uncovered appears to be a template that's been used in at least 12 other communities. Same pattern: retroactive rule changes, fake violation notices, inflated repair costs, legal intimidation. Susan slid a folder across the table. The FBI agent I spoke with, Jennifer Morrison, wants to meet with you. She thinks you've stumbled onto something significant. Sarah opened the folder and felt her blood turn to ice. The first page was a photo of David Kellerman, the lawyer who'd threatened her at the board meeting, but the caption identified him as David Kellerman, a.k.a. David Stern. a.k.a. David Ken, suspected of running HOA fraud operations in Nevada, Arizona, and California. He's using fake names, multiple identities, shell companies, the works. The FBI thinks he's the operational head of a criminal organization that specifically targets HOA communities. They move in, take over the boards through planted candidates, then systematically bleed the residents dry. Sarah flipped through more pages. Financial records showing millions in fraudulent charges. Photos of other communities that had been victimized. And at the center of it all, a network of fake lawyers, contractors, and property management companies. Margaret's not the mastermind, Sarah realized. She's just another mark, more like a willing accomplice. The FBI's financial analysis shows she's been receiving kickbacks for every violation fee collected. She's made over $80,000 in the past 6 months alone. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Tom Brennan. Emergency. Someone tried to break into the Kowalski's house. Mrs. K is in the hospital with chest pains. I have to go, Sarah said, standing up. But Susan, I want to meet with this FBI agent today. Sarah, wait. Susan grabbed her arm. These people have escalated to violence. Maybe you should consider backing off. Let the FBI handle it. Sarah looked at her attorney, a woman who'd helped her rebuild her life after her marriage imploded, who'd fought beside her through the worst period of her life. Susan, the Kowalskis are in their 70s. Mrs. Kowalski has a heart condition. These bastards literally put her in the hospital because her husband wouldn't pay for a mailbox. He never asked them to replace. Her voice turned deadly quiet. I'm not backing down. Not when they're hurting innocent people. At the hospital, Sarah found Tom Brennan pacing in the waiting room, his normally calm demeanor shattered. How is she? Sarah asked. Stable, but scared. The doctors say the chest pains were stress-induced, but at her age, Tom's voice trailed off. What exactly happened? Around noon, someone broke the lock on their back gate and started taking photos of their yard. When Mr. Kowalski confronted them, they claimed to be HOA contractors documenting violations. Stan told them to get lost, and they said he'd be hearing from the board about failure to cooperate with official inspections. Tom's hands clenched into fists. An hour later, Helen started having chest pains. She was terrified they were going to lose their house. They've lived there for 15 years, Sarah. It's all they have. Sarah felt the familiar cold rage building in her chest. Where's Mr. Kowalski now? With Helen. He's talking about just paying whatever they want. He can't handle seeing her like this. Sarah closed her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. Tom, I need you to do something for me. Get in touch with every resident who's been hit with these fake violations. Tell them to meet at my house tomorrow morning at 10. All of them. What are you planning? I'm going to end this. Tonight at 6 p.m., Sarah sat in her Honda Civic across the street from Margaret Whitmore's house, watching and waiting. The FBI agent, Jennifer Morrison, had agreed to meet her at 8 p.m., but Sarah had some reconnaissance to do first. Margaret's house was a sprawling colonial in the most expensive part of Willowbrook Estates, the kind of house that cost 3 times what Sarah's did, funded by HOA kickbacks and fraud. Irony wasn't lost on her. At 6:30, a black BMW pulled into Margaret's driveway. Sarah recognized the driver, immediately David Kellerman, the fake lawyer who'd threatened her at the board meeting. Sarah activated the recording app on her phone and settled in to wait. The conversation that followed, captured through Margaret's open living room window, was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. Told you to handle this quietly, Kellerman was saying, his voice agitated. Now the FBI is sniffing around, and your little harassment campaign has attracted attention. She wouldn't back down, Margaret replied, her voice defensive. I tried everything, the legal threats, the property violations, even the break-in attempts. She just keeps pushing. The break-in attempts. Kellerman's voice rose. Jesus Christ, Margaret, we never authorized that. That was supposed to be intimidation only. Well, it's not working. And now the Kowalski woman is in the hospital, and people are asking questions. There was a long pause, then Kellerman's voice, colder than before. We need to cut our losses. The operation here is blown. Time to move on. What about the money? We've only collected about half of what we projected. Better than nothing, and better than federal prison. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she heard Margaret's next words. What about Sarah Chen? She's not going to just forget about this. She's become a liability. But that's not your problem anymore. What do you mean? I mean, some problems require permanent solutions. The kind that send a message to other communities about what happens when people don't mind their own business. Sarah's hands shook as she saved the recording. This had gone far beyond financial fraud. They were talking about murder. She was about to start her car when she noticed the third vehicle pulling into Margaret's driveway. A white panel van with no identifying marks. 2 men got out, both carrying duffel bags. Sarah's military father had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct was screaming danger. She called 911 first, then FBI agent Morrison. This is Sarah Chen. I need you at 4847 Elm Ridge Drive immediately. I have evidence of a criminal conspiracy, and I believe they're planning to kill me. 20 minutes later, Sarah watched from her car as FBI agents surrounded Margaret's house. The arrest was swift and efficient. Margaret Kellerman and the 2 men from the van were all taken into custody. Agent Morrison approached Sarah's car, her expression grim. Miss Chen, you just prevented what we believe would have been a very serious crime. The men in that van were carrying enough equipment to stage a home invasion that would have looked like a random robbery gone wrong. Sarah's entire body was shaking now, the adrenaline and fear finally catching up with her. How long has this been going on? She asked. The HOA fraud scheme. About 3 years. But this is the first time we've caught them planning violence. Your investigation forced them to escalate, and that's what gave us the evidence we needed. Agent Morrison handed Sarah a card. We're going to need you to testify, but in the meantime, you should know that this case is going to make national news. What you've uncovered is going to help us shut down similar operations across the country. Sarah drove home in a daze, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She'd started this fight over a painted door, and it had nearly gotten her killed. But as she pulled into her driveway and saw the neighbors already gathering, on her front lawn word had spread fast about the FBI arrest, she realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every homeowner who'd been bullied, intimidated, and financially abused by people who were supposed to protect their interests. Tom Brennan approached her car as she got out. Sarah, we heard about The arrests? Are you okay? She looked at the growing crowd of neighbors, people who'd been living in fear for months, wondering if they'd lose their homes to fraudulent charges and manufactured violations. I'm fine, Tom, and more importantly, we won. What happens now? Sarah smiled for the first time in days. Now we get our money back. All of it. And we make sure this never happens to anyone else. But even as she spoke, Sarah knew the real victory wasn't the arrests or the money they'd recover. It was the moment when her